Okay, so week 11 discussion response. Let's go ahead and do this. Again, overall, you guys did very well. A couple of things I would like to remind you of and to have you continue to pay attention to before we get into, uh, just the discussion part. First off, anytime you put ND on a citation for no date, I would urge you to really, really make sure that there is no date. In many cases, what I've found both in my own writing and in editing other people's papers for books or various other content, the thing I've found is most of the time when you put ND, it means that you're not looking hard enough. So for example, if you find one source and it just says ND, you may want to search that source by itself and see if you can locate the date. If you're also, if you're searching or you're referencing something that is online, one of the things you can do is look up in the URL bar, in the search bar up at the top, and sometimes it will give you an idea of the date. In some cases, it may say something like 1705-06. Well, if that's the case, that may mean that it came out in January, February, March, April, May. It may mean that it came in May 6th of 2017, depending on how it's labeled. It's usually pretty easy in most cases to find no date citations, or rather to find the actual date for citations. But that usually throws up a big red flag in anybody that's for anybody who's reading your content. So if you have ND in any of these, and quite a few of you did, please really, really make sure that it is in fact something where it's just impossible for you to find the date. Couple of other things on this. Please proofread, spell check, all that jazz. Don't go lazy on me here. Keep it high. Keep your writing tight, and everything is good. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the discussion. So the question here specifically says, in wartime, what is the role and responsibility of the media? Consider the balance between the public's supposed right to know and the government's needs/desire to keep information secret. Where do you stand? Why? Give examples from modern media where privacy and security come into conflict. First off, the examples from modern media, some of you guys did not really do that. When there's part of a prompt like this, make sure you get it in, all right? I want you guys practicing citing sources and using information in this class. Okay, so the question that I come up with here is, all right, where do you stand? Right to know versus need for secrecy. When you're talking about the media's role in wartime, this is, in modern times at least, a very common debate. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm talking about modern time. Some of you pointed out, I think maybe Austin Luter said this, that wasn't always the case. In fact, post or pre-Vietnam, a bit in Korea, really the public didn't supposedly have a right to know. They had a responsibility to protect their country, to support the home front war effort in any way, shape, or form they can. If you don't believe me on this, go back and look at some newsreels from World War II. You can find them on YouTube, and you'll see that basically every single one of them says that it is the public's right to participate. It's their responsibility to support the war effort before and beyond anything else. It was only in Vietnam where we really started to see this supposed right to know what is going on in a military conflict. Generally, the idea was that, first off, the public didn't need to know all of what went into war, because it might dishearten them, and that would hurt the war effort back at home. After all, if you knew and you saw in brilliant color people losing limbs and getting blown to bits, I don't want to be crass here, but if you saw all the violence that goes into war, would you still support it? Now, the truth of the matter is military personnel go through intense psychological training to deal with this, but the average person very much does not. So when it comes to wartime, how much do you need? If it's something that is, say, just or necessary, like I would suppose most of us would think that fighting the Nazis and ending Hitler's regime was probably worthwhile. But how much do you need to see the day-to-day going on? Would it make the public lose heart? Flip side of this, if the government is in a quagmire, a no-win situation, it's fighting a war with no desire to actually win the war, as many said that Vietnam was. Doesn't the public have a right to know whether or not their government is actually in a worthwhile endeavor, whether all these lost lives are actually worth it? Doesn't the public have the right to make that decision for themselves? We have a civilian leadership, not a military leadership in this country. So as such, shouldn't we have the right to know these things? So it's a precarious balance between what we have a right to know and what is actually helpful for us to know. I can't make that decision, and I can't speak to what everyone thinks or should think is the correct balance on here. This is a question that, frankly, I'm not sure there is an answer to, or at least not one that works for everyone. A couple of things that people brought up, and I wanted to touch on. Someone brought up the idea of agenda setting. Charita brought up agenda setting theory. This is wonderful to bring up in this context. Agenda setting and framing, which is an extension of agenda setting. Agenda setting, if you'll remember, says that the media doesn't tell us what to think, but what to think about. And then I usually add in, and in what context. So, for example, if we were to talk about, say, abortion, the media says you need to have an opinion on this, as opposed to, someone going, look, if I'm a dude, maybe I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, or maybe it's a nuanced issue. But the media says this is important. You need to have an opinion. You need to have a thought about this. So that's agenda setting. Framing says, all right, so not only do you need to have an opinion on it, but here's the two opinions you can have, pro-life, pro-choice. Okay? There's not a whole lot of room in this case for someone to say, I'm pretty much pro-life, but when the mother's life is in danger, there's a problem, okay? That framing is connected with that agenda setting. Think about abortion issue, have one of these two opinions, dichotomous points of view. In the wartime, agenda setting and framing is also very important. For example, the media, potentially rightfully so, says, think about the war effort. Think about it. You should be interested in it. Let's cover it. Let's make sure it's front of mind. And by the way, here's the context in which to think about it. So is it a matter of, let's talk about how many deaths we see every day? Is it a matter of covering victories that our soldiers have? Well, depending on how you decide to cover it, your public could have very, very different perspectives on the war effort. If all I'm showing the people, or the primary thing I'm showing my audience, is basically death toll, death toll, death toll, death toll, well, understandably, the public that's watching this might go, man, we really shouldn't be there. It's just death, 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 death. Flip side. If we turn this around and we say, the U.S. forces won another astounding victory, or here's a soldier interacting with a child who's happy that they're there, it's the spread of freedom, etc., well, at that point, we're supporting kind of a positive outlook on the war. So, agenda setting, again, says this is important, pay attention to it. Framing of the story can have a profound impact on how your audience is actually going to interact with the story, because you're telling them in what context they need to think about. The most important thing is loss of life. Okay, well at that point, that's what you need to focus on, is loss of life. Now, what you think about that, like whether the loss of life is worth it or not, is completely up to you, but this is the context that you need to think about this war in. If it is about freedom and liberating the downtrodden, well, at that point, that's more important than necessarily focusing on loss of life. So, anyway, I wanted to touch on that. That was a great thing to bring in. All right, so I'll cut it off at that point, and this is a response to your week 11 discussion.